On a snowy winter's night in the town of Starkfield, Massachusetts, a man, Ethan Frome, while taking a walk, stops by a local church and peers his head into the basement. What he finds is a dance going on in this basement. Ethan is immediately drawn to a woman named Maddie Silver, who happens to be Ethan's housekeeper and his wife, Zena's cousin. He continues to contemplate what his life would be like if he was with a woman as radiant and exotic as Maddie. He stares and stares and only continues to be entranced by this woman's beauty. After recalling a conversation that Ethan had had with his wife, where he was informed that Maddie may be getting married and may have to move away, Ethan begins to brood and becomes saddened by the news. Ethan, who was scheduled to take Maddie home from this dance, has now become overrun with emotion and unable to control himself. When Maddie leaves the dance floor, Ethan, in a cowardly fashion, hides away while he watches Maddie talk to another man. This man offers Maddie a ride home, prompting Ethan to swoop in at the last second to walk her home. This sudden appearance shocks Maddie, and the two share a laugh. This provides Ethan with some comfort after a short period of melancholy. After passing the coasting hill, where the people of the town go to sled, Maddie mentions a couple who had slid into the big elm tree at the bottom of the hill and were presumed to be dead. The author uses this moment to foreshadow the fatal climax at the end of the story. Almost at the house, Ethan reluctantly puts his arm around Maddie in order to display some sign of affection. When the two arrive at the house, we find that Zena, Ethan's wife, is sickly and seems to be on the verge of death. The next morning, Ethan buries himself in work, hauling lumber all day in order to take his mind off of Maddie. He ultimately regrets that he did not kiss her when he had the chance to. When Ethan returns home, he finds his wife Zena in a dress with luggage by her side. She explains that she intends on traveling to Bettsbridge on an overnight visit to seek medical care from her doctor. Ethan, in an attempt to get alone time with Maddie, lies to Zena as to why he is unable to drive Zena to her appointment. He instead sends a hired man named Jotham Powell to take her to Bettsbridge, giving Ethan a whole night alone with Maddie. After Zena leaves for her overnight trip, Ethan embarks on an errand, delivering lumber to a man named Andrew Hale. After realizing he had promised Zena money from this trip as a part of his massive scheme to get alone time with Maddie, Ethan asks Andrew for an upfront payment of $50. Andrew declines Ethan's request due to his own personal financial constraints. On his way home, Ethan runs into many people, including Dennis Eady, Ned Hale, and Ruth Varnum, all of whom's love and happiness evokes immense jealousy in Ethan. Ethan returns home to find Maddie in a dress with a ribbon in her hair, getting ready for dinner. During their meal, the cat jumps on the table and shatters their pickle dish that Zena had received as a wedding gift. This scene is ultimately representative of the destruction of Ethan and Zena's marriage. After dinner, the two attempt to unwind and engage in a conversation about everyday matters, one of which being the idea that the two would go sledding the following night. When Ethan mentions to Maddie that he had seen Ruth and Ned kissing, the two become silent as the conversation of any romantic deeds was too volatile for the two to handle. They both sit awkwardly as the sexual and romantic tension in the rooms become palpable. Ethan boldly places his hand on the piece of cloth that Maddie was using to sew and holds it there tenderly. He picks up the end of her sewing work and kisses it softly. He looks up to see Maddie getting up and putting her things away. The two say goodnight to each other without another word spoken. When Zena returns home from her trip, it seems as though she is suspicious of what has gone on between Ethan and Maddie during her absence. Zena explains to Ethan that they will be hiring a new caretaker for her and that Maddie will no longer be needed. Ethan quickly becomes agitated with Zena and attempts to refute her ideas. To make matters worse, Zena announces that Maddie will be asked to leave the house indefinitely. Simultaneously, Maddie calls the two down for supper. Zena, of course, declines, however, Ethan pursues Maddie in the kitchen. At dinner, Ethan puts it all on the line and kisses Maddie passionately on the lips. Later on, Ethan finds Zena crying, holding the shards of their engagement pickle dish, which Maddie had been forbidden from using in the past. Zena reprimands Maddie, and the level of hostility in the house grows immensely. After Zena retires to her bedroom, Ethan begins to process a local story of a man who had abandoned his wife for the woman he truly loved. This prompts Ethan to write a goodbye letter to Xena and run away with Maddie, his one true love. Ethan realizes that this idea is not financially feasible and falls asleep on the couch in tears. Ethan wakes up and has a realization that it would be Maddie's last day at the house. He embarks on an elaborate mission in order to fundraise his romantic escape and attempts to track down Andrew Hale for the advance on the lumber he had delivered. Going as far as lying as to what would be done with the money, Ethan realizes that what he had planned to do was immoral and decides to head home. In the final chapter of the novel, which takes an overall melancholy tone, Ethan disregards Powell's request to drop Maddie at the station and agrees to drop her himself. Xena is reluctant to comply with this change in plans, as Ethan was needed to tend to the faulty stove in the spare bedroom at the time. Ethan heeds Xena's prohibitions and continues to drop Maddie himself. On the way to the station, the two make a pit stop at the coasting hill, where they have discussed sledding for weeks prior. The two glide down the hill together in a cheerful embrace and head to the top of the hill for another go-around. After realizing that this would be their final moments together, the two say goodbye in a mutual star-crossed lovers' suicide pact. The two intentionally glide the sled into the massive elm tree at the bottom of the hill to pursue their inevitable, or so they thought, death. This attempt to end their lives failed miserably, leaving the two completely paralyzed. Ethan and Xena were forced to live out their days, rotting in the house alone with them and Ethan's sickly wife, Xena, for the rest of their days.